Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps more people see the content. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated as I post stuff just like this all of the time. Unless you want to miss out, then don't subscribe. But yeah, with all of that being said, tonight's lineup is one of the best we've had in a while. There's quite a few really great stories in this one that I think you guys will like. But yeah, enjoy, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was brewing a pot of coffee in the break room when Alice and Kai walked in. "Hey, Lee," Alice said. "Oh my god, it's too late for me to be smelling coffee right now." "That's a morning smell," said Kai. "Hey guys, heading out?" I said. They looked at each other and then at me. Kai was the first one to speak up. "Yeah, dude, it's 9 o'clock. The work culture at the advertising firm where we all worked promoted working late. In fact, it was a de facto requirement. Coming in at 9 and leaving at 5 was technically allowed. HR would tell you that you were entitled to work those hours, but everyone knew what the real rules were. If the clock struck 5 and you got up to leave, you would have to endure an onslaught of judgmental glances on your way out. Next day, you would come in to learn that you had been taken off an important project. The message was clear: work past sundown, or be an outcast. Despite this, no one at the office stayed past 9 p.m. By 8:59, everyone was lining up at the elevator with their backpacks and briefcases. Having only been at Holdsworth and Gore for a little over a month, these were all customs I had to learn through observation. You know, I still don't get the whole 9 o'clock thing. Why can't we just stay later? We all know the amount of work that has to get done before the pitch meeting this Thursday. I said. We get it, but around here, staying past 9 is just as bad as cutting out early, Alice said. There's something in here that comes out at night, Kai said. I laughed at what I thought was just one of Kai's many deadpan, sarcastic remarks. They didn't respond, and after looking at their face, I could tell they were serious. You've got to be kidding me, I said. When I first started, I was confused by the whole 9 o'clock thing too. After I gained the trust of one of the higher-ups, she let me in on the secret. People have seen strange things wandering the halls late at night. I've heard people are not the same after spending the night here. Some just stop coming into work entirely. I even heard one guy was found dead, Alice said. Yeah, I heard that too, Kai added. Wait, do you know anyone who has seen this thing? I said. Well, no, Alice said. And do you even know what this thing is? Dude, trust us, Kai said. We know what we're talking about. I don't need this shit, I said. Yeah, just go ahead and take the night off because of ghosts or monsters or whatever imaginary bullshit. I'll be here doing your work. Kai shook their head before walking out. Okay, dude, have it your way. Alice gave me a sad smile before turning to follow Kai out of the break room and down the hall to the elevators. After they left, the silence rang in my ear. I wasn't proud of the way I snapped at my coworkers, but stress has a way of making people mean and unpleasant. When I decided to study graphic design in college, I didn't think I would fall into the same trap as every other young professional at the start of their career. But there I was, working long hours in business casual and drinking terrible office coffee. I was a creative, an artist, I thought, but I was wrong. I was just another person with a skill that some company could take advantage of for profit. I tried to shrug off the encounter, poured myself a cup of what smelled more like gasoline than coffee, and returned to my desk. The fact that a firm like Holdsworth and Gore exists in a small town like mine is astonishing. Growing up, I knew this town to be basically a main street and a handful of neighborhoods surrounded by Douglas fir trees, which caught the fog that rolled in from the sea. I went away to study in the city, but when I came back, I was shocked to discover that a tall, gray office building was built on the periphery of the town. It towered over the low-rise residential area like an imposing giant. Holdsworth and Gore was on the 9th floor. The pressure was on for us in the art department because when we finally had the chance to score a big, local client, just a few days, the partners at Holdsworth and Gore were set to make a pitch to the local logging company to do all their marketing. The logging company essentially ran my town. Almost everyone around worked in the logging industry in one way or another. This was a big deal. So if I didn't have multiple designs, concepts, and mock-ups ready before the pitch meeting, I likely didn't have a job. I mentally prepared for hours of work and settled in. It was going to be a long night. The succeeding hours were kind of a blur to me. It felt like I wasn't thinking, only doing. What I did remember is the moment I realized I needed to leave. My eyes just could not focus and my brain seemed to stop working. I squinted and realized it was nearly 3 a.m. The time surprised me and I knew I couldn't continue working. Whatever I had left to do, I could wait until the next day after a few hours of sleep. I gathered my things and passed the dim and empty workstations. They were giving off a feeling of sadness, as if they felt abandoned without my coworkers there to take advantage of them. I turned the corner to go down the hall to the elevators when I stopped. On the right-hand side, where the hall opened into the break room, I saw the light was on. This unnerved me because the light was motion activated, meaning someone or something had to have triggered it. I thought it could have been a janitor, but as I approached the break room to investigate further, I heard humming. It was a sickly sweet humming of a melody so simple, it must have been a nursery rhyme. My chest tightened and my heart fluttered like a furious bird trapped in a cage as I moved toward the sound. I gasped for air and braced myself for what I was about to see as I poked my head in the break room. I saw nothing. No one was in there. It was just an empty room illuminated by fluorescent lights. I could also no longer hear the humming. I took in a relieving breath and laughed. Maybe I shouldn't have stayed, I thought. I was convinced I was so sleep deprived that I was now hallucinating, thinking about the massive apology I owed Alice and Kai. I turned off the break room lights, which left me in the dark. Fuck, I shouted as I patted my pockets. I intended to use my phone as a flashlight to guide me the rest of the way, but I realized at that moment that I must have left it at my desk. Slightly defeated, I walked back to my workstation. I was, however, disappointed to not find my phone anywhere. It was not sitting on my desk when I arrived. I pulled open all the drawers and emptied them, but it was nowhere to be found. I got on the floor and swatted under the desk, hoping to feel its cold screen with my fingers, but touched nothing. On my third or fourth sweep of the floor, I heard the humming again. It sounded like it was behind me, so I shot my head up and turned around. I only saw a row of empty cubicles. Tentatively, I returned to my search, but my focus immediately shifted when the humming resumed. This time in front of me. I carefully scanned the empty hallway in front of me, focusing as hard as I could to locate the source of it. I strained both my eyes and ears to try to figure out what I was hearing, but at this point the humming had receded, although there was something I did hear. Before I registered what the sound was, I felt my attention shift to something that was standing behind me. I was horrified when I felt a chill on my back. A shiver ripped down my spine when I fully realized that someone or something was standing close enough to me that I could feel the breath coming from their mouth on my neck. With extreme apprehension, I turned my head around my shoulder. "Get out of my house." I was face to face with whoever had been standing right behind me. She shouted with a fury that caused my body to seize. Her face was contorted in rage. Her skin was sickly gray, like the sky on a cloudy day. Her blood-red eyes stabbed like daggers into my chest. Out of the most compelling fear I've ever known, I sprinted down the hall and instinctively locked myself in a supply closet for safety. After the door shut, I took a moment in complete darkness to feel the silence around me. I was trembling and my body was shaking. After a few moments, I started to feel more at ease. My previously shallow breaths began to deepen as I felt the relief sink in. I began planning my way out of the building without getting caught when I heard something in the closet with me. At first, I was thrashing around the room, unable to determine what I was hearing or where in the room it was. Then it became more distinct. At my feet, I heard short bursts of sobs and whimpers. I turned on the light and saw the person that had just confronted me weeping on the floor. In the light, I noticed features of her that I hadn't noticed before. Features that made her look more human. She had long, stringy hair tied in a low ponytail. She wore a flowing nightgown with a floral pattern. She had hands and eyes and a nose like me. I could feel her sadness. "Ma'am?" I said, kneeling down to her level. "What's the matter?" "I just want to go home," she groaned. She turned over on her back and draped her arms over her forehead. "Where's home?" I said. In response to this, she sobbed harder. "Here, don't you see? It's right here. I died here 40 years ago. This was once my house. Can you believe that? I died alone, never buried, and was never able to move on. Now my house is gone and I'm stuck here. And all I want to do is go home." "What can I do?" I said. "Can you please just let me in? All I need is someone to welcome me in. I've scared everyone else away, but if you let me in, I can be at peace," she said. "Yes, of course," I said. "Will you say it? Please, just say it. Do you let me in?" "Yes," I said. "I let you in." At this, the woman reached up to embrace me while weeping. "Thank you," she said over and over. "I've only ever wanted peace." I returned her hug and felt her heave on my shoulder as she dampened my shirt with tears. Slowly, the sound of her crying grew softer and softer until I could no longer hear any noise. I no longer felt any arms around me, and I looked down to see she was gone. I sat on the floor of the closet for some length of time, staring off into space and processing the events of that night. After a while, I stood up to leave. Satisfied, I smiled at the closet floor, turned off the light, and went home. The next morning, I went straight to meet Alice and Kai at their desks. As soon as they saw me, their eyes went wide, and they quickly stood next to me. "Holy shit. You're still alive," Kai said. I laughed. "I owe both of you a massive apology," I said. "Never mind that," Alice said. "Come here, I need to talk to you." Alice grabbed my arm and brought me down the hall. "I'm shocked you're still around," she said. "I couldn't sleep last night knowing you were here. I tried calling you, but you wouldn't pick up." "Yeah," I said, chuckling. "I lost my phone." Well, regardless, I figured out what it is that haunts this building. I did too, I said, smiling in an attempt to bring Alice's anxiety down. I met her. You met the demon? Alice said. Demon? I said. She wasn't exactly pleasant, but she was hardly a demon. Listen to me, she said. I called up my old boss, the one who originally told me not to stay here too late, and she told me more about what she knew. No one is quite sure how it got here, but there is a demon that lives in this building that comes alive at night. It is a master of deception and deceit and will change the way it presents itself to people in order to gain their trust. It looks for human souls to terrorize and eventually devour. The most important thing, she told me, was to never, under any circumstances, invite the demon in. When Alice said this to me, a feeling washed over me like a hard fist straight into my gut. I heard a ringing in my ear and all other sounds became muffled. Waves of nausea crashed through me. The previously solid floor beneath my feet began tilting and spinning. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Alice asking me, through tears, the same question over and over again. Lee, did you let it in? Did you let it in, Lee? I immediately rushed home. I couldn't stay in that office building a moment longer. On the drive home, I sped and swerved like a madman the whole way. I fumbled getting my key into the lock in the front door, but when I finally got inside, I was horrified at what I found. On my bed was my phone, which, up until then, had been lost. I heard the door creak behind me as it closed slowly. I cautiously approached the bed and picked up my phone. Waiting for me was one new text message. It read, "I'm coming in." Then, I heard the door swing open. This happened to me a few years back. Background. I grew up near Los Angeles and then moved to Phoenix, Arizona in search of lower rent. Phoenix is fun, but I often miss home. I fly or drive back every other month to hang out with my friends and my brother Evan. It's about a 5-hour journey, and there's always a point in the drive where I look around, check my mirrors, and realize I'm completely alone. No other cars on the road and tens of miles yawning between myself and civilization. I look to the mountains on the horizon and my stomach drops. Vertigo hits, knowing I'm completely lost to civilization. That I could have a heart attack from anxiety and help wouldn't come for hours. I just don't trust myself not to lose my mind, strip off my clothes and run wild into the dust and withered plants. And who would know where I was? How long would it take to find my body? All I can do is hold my breath, grip the wheel, and wait. Hope for my return to the real world. There's about a 5-mile stretch in the road, too, where my unease always intensifies. Maybe those familiar with the Interstate 10 between California and Arizona will know what I'm talking about. It's marked by a single saguaro cactus, standing alone, way out in the west after you've left the crowds of them around Phoenix behind. I wonder if someone planted it there on purpose, to make a border. There are 4 things I often experience on this stretch of the road, and only there. Dead livestock, weird billboards, payphone booths, and the radio station. And I'm not the only one who's seen them, so I know I'm not hallucinating. On drives where I was joined by friends or my brother Ethan, I've waited and let them point the weird out to me, confirming I'm not imagining these things. I wouldn't think anything of a dead pig or cow on the side of the road in some parts of the country, but there aren't any farms anywhere near this highway. It's just desolate wasteland as far as the eye can see. I guess they must have been tossed from the back of a truck, having died while being transported. But I see at least one carcass every drive. I suppose the heat does them in. Clearly they didn't have proper shade or enough water. Who's stupid enough to keep making this same mistake? The billboards seem to have moved every time I pass by. They're those huge 100-foot-long ones you see when coming into an urban hub. The images on them look software generated. As in, there are suggestions of things that might be spaces, or limbs, or plant life, but there isn't quite enough of any single object to identify it. It's hard to explain, but they just leave your brain grasping, feeling out of breath. So yeah, since they don't seem to be advertising anything, I'm thinking they must be someone's art project. Hell, you know there are a whole bunch of artists in California, and the structures, though they appear to be made of steel, are actually a light material, suited to temporary installation. I don't get a lot of installation art, but I get this. Man, those boards just make you feel something. They tower above and throw the car into shadow as you pass by. These monoliths, vertical in the middle of the plains. Something about them just makes me shiver. I did a few Google searches, but couldn't find anything about them online. I really would like to know the artist if anyone can hit me up with the details. I realize as I write this how stupid it is that I've never taken a picture of one. But since the signal is whack out there in the wilderness, my phone's usually out of reach in the back until I've returned to the real world and stopped at a gas station. I always assumed the phone booths were related to the billboard art, but since the incident, I'm not so sure. They usually show up a few hundred yards from the road. You can spot them lit up, all ghostly, in the distance if you drive by after sunset. Before my close encounter, I always meant to get out and investigate these, but then I always set out from Phoenix later than I planned. I'm always running late, and the scorching heat outside the car isn't very inviting anyway. The radio station is what makes the drive fun with a friend. Although, I was alone when I first discovered it, and it seriously freaked me out. I was going Cali, Arizona way, searching stations around 99 MHz when it made itself known in a roar of laughter. And that's pretty much all it ever plays. Laughter. Like the laugh track between jokes on a sitcom, men and women's voices, blaring suddenly, then quickly stopping. Of course, most stations gradually decline in quality as you drive out of range. The one just out completely the moment I drove past that lonely cactus. The laughing has pauses where character dialogue should be. Me and Ethan have made a game of filling the gaps with our own dialogue, but a lot of our lines are too R-rated for the average sitcom. So yeah, it's fun with a friend, but unsettling when you're on your own in that void between states. There are definitely other sounds in the background, murmuring and sloshing water. Me and my buddies have tried to catch these hidden words, but with little luck. Bianca is convinced she heard the word Talon once, but Corey insists it was felon. Yeah, we got nothing. When I do the drive alone, I just put on my own music. Before you ask, yes, I've heard of those Russian number stations, and yes, I think it could be something similar. A soundscape where coded messages can be hidden. All of this is definitely strange, but explainable. Just because it's a mystery, that doesn't mean it's something supernatural or sinister. But I'm here to talk about that incident of a few years ago. I usually try not to think about it, but I've had a few beers this evening, and it's all coming to the surface. I was driving to Cali on a Thursday afternoon. I had Friday off work, so I was looking forward to a long weekend. The skies were deep blue. I had plenty of snacks for the road. I was in good spirits. The car was a bit of a mess. My brother had left some of his things in the back, and for some reason, Unknown to me, it reeked of fast food grease. But I knew the road well, and savored all my favorite sights. A mountain on the right that looks like a sleeping cat. A beat-up old gas station, like something from an old movie. A couple of hours later, I passed that lone cactus. It was casting a long shadow. Suppose I was feeling daring, because as soon as I passed it, I started searching for the secret station. Soon enough, the laughter flared up. I snorted too, sort of relieving tension. I said a few of our old lines from me and my brother's made-up sitcom, and as always, the audience enjoyed them, laughing uproariously. I left a blank line between each of my own, as if absent Ethan was responding. Say, Josephine, have you been drinking that radioactive tea again? You look like shit. Laughter, and then a pause, and then more laughter. You're just not the genetically modified alpaca woman I married anymore. We're through. You hear me? Laughter, and then silence, and so on. Stupid shit. The sun was setting, everything glowing in hell colors, when I saw the phone booth. It was right next to the road. I'd never seen one so close before. Checking my rearview mirror, no cars behind me, of course. I stepped on the brake. I pulled over in the glow of the booth, admiring it. The sickly green light inside flickered slightly, but really it was a wonder it had any power at all. I wound down the window, and the desert air was like hot breath on my face. I leaned out, already starting to sweat, mesmerized by this ridiculous, impractical art piece. And then, right on fucking cue, it rang. Somehow, I was expecting it, but still my heart was pounding, almost painful. I was rattled knowing my presence had been detected. I took a deep breath and got out of the car, looking around carefully for a camera. I took a few steps towards the phone, then bang. I spun around. A metallic impact. Something had struck the car. It was still bouncing slightly on its suspension. Breath rattling, sweat running down my back, I circled the vehicle. There was nothing. No dents in the body. Nothing on the ground. No one there. Thank God, but what happened? A change in temperature? Some internal breakage? The phone was still ringing, and how? Surely the day's sun should have cooked its circuits to death. I stepped inside. It was baking between those plexiglass walls, but I closed the door behind me. I didn't want to touch that receiver. It brought me back to a biology class, trying to prick my own fingertip with a needle, to draw blood cells for a microscope. I knew I had to do it, but my body was telling me no. I reached slowly, then slower, like time inside the box was thickening, pausing with my hand hovering over the receiver. Then something let go, and I snatched it up and held it to my ear. There was rustling. A somewhat familiar voice in the background of what I could hear from the echo was a tiled, air-conned room. Then the caller spoke. Hey, who's this? It was my brother's voice. Impossible. I struggled for air, confused. This was beyond the scope of an art piece. Greetings, stranger, he said cheerfully. Are you pranking me, or did you butt dial? Ethan? I croaked. He cursed very faintly. The air frothed with a panic for a moment, then he hung up. I put the phone down and just stood there for a while. Everything was silent except the blood pounding in my ears. I wanted to tell myself it was a weird dream, but I knew better. I ran back to the car, jumped as the headlights flared and the speakers came alive with laughter. The sound was deafening. I was sure I'd turned the radio off. I wiped sweat off my forehead, feverish, convinced the car itself was laughing at me. Despite the desert heat, my hairs were standing on end. Certain I was being watched, toyed with, I got back in the car. The sooner I got out of there, the better. I floored it and sped off into the dusk. I tried taking deep breaths to calm myself, but spasms of fear kept shaking my rib cage, undoing my efforts. After a while, my body simply ran out of adrenaline. Exhausted, dry-mouthed, I reached for my water bottle in the back seat, accidentally knocking Ethan's glasses to the floor. His glasses? How the hell did he leave those behind? Then came searing white panic. I remembered setting off from Phoenix. Ethan was with me. He had come to stay at mine, and we were going back to California together. It all came rushing back, pointing out the cat-shaped mountain to each other, his story about his housemate, him begging me to stop and buy him lunch, and me scolding him when he dropped fries down the side of the seat, the dialogue we performed with the laugh track, and then dual, simultaneous memories of my journey alone. It's hard to explain this overlap. It was like nothing I've ever experienced before. So where was he now? My first instinct was to go back. Why would he have gotten out of the car? Why couldn't I remember it? The worst thought was that I might have thrown him out, hurt him somehow. I've never in my life wanted to hurt my little brother, but then I seemed to have completely lost my mind. I couldn't be sure of anything. I checked my phone. No signal. Son of a bitch. If I went back and found him, would I try to hurt him again? I drove on, lost, away from any other witnesses. The landscape just wasn't real. My single gaze wasn't enough to make it solid and whole. I'd caught the land unprepared, so the road and the yellow-gray ground was just a thin membrane, with nothing underneath that layer of dust and soil. I was sobbing, certain the car wheels were skimming a fragile shell, and I was about to slip through into a hollow void of incomplete terrain. My legs went numb. There wasn't enough gravity. At some point, I think I decided I needed help before I went to find Ethan. I wasn't even sure my memories of him being there were real. I prayed they were just a paranoid delusion, that my brother was safe and sound, cooking dinner and getting high in his apartment. A wind turbine in the distance told me I was getting close to my destination. Bianca had invited me to stay over at her place. I pulled up on the drive, headlights reflected in the glossy pane of the doorway. As I turned off the engine and stepped out, I saw her come running to the window, eyes wide. She was scrambling at the door as I approached. Burst open. Jesus fucking Christ, Sam. Where have you been? Ethan. She yelled back into the house. He's here, Ethan. Ethan's here. She nodded and threw her arms around me. I could breathe again. I hugged her back, elated. He was safe. I'd only left him die in the desert in my sick imagination. He was there. He clapped me on the shoulder, dark shadows under his eyes, saying, "Shit, dude, where have you been?" He looked over my shoulder. "How did you get here?" I laughed. I was so relieved to see him. And what was he talking about? I drove, I said, raising my eyebrows and indicating the silver Honda on the drive. But he just looked at me like I was the one fooling around. I saw him get out of that car, Bianca said, pointing at the car and the keys in my hand. "Then where's the car I got here in?" Ethan asked. "Did you rent the same car?" Before I could ask what he meant by that, Bianca said, "I better let everyone know you're okay." Turned out they'd reported me missing. Once I'd called my parents to promise them I was okay and would explain everything later, we gathered around Bianca's kitchen island. With much needed glasses of whiskey in hand, we tried to make sense of things. The first shock was learning it was a Sunday. 4 days had passed since I set out from Phoenix, and I had no memory of them. Our phones, Bianca's laptop, and the local TV news confirmed the date. How is that possible? I asked, thinking of the single bottle of water in the back seat of the car, the tank with plenty of gas left in it. "I can't explain it," said Ethan. "But we set off together on Thursday evening, right?" "Right," I said, realizing those memories of the drive with him must have been real. "We stopped at McDonald's." Ethan arrived at Bianca's early on Friday morning looking spooked. His memory of the drive is quite lucid, up until the weird zone, where he calls. We drove up to a phone booth beside the road. He said the phone inside was ringing. "I watched you pick up the phone," he said. "A few seconds went by, then you just slumped to the ground, like you'd been knocked out. I remember yelling out, then nothing. At some point I woke up and I was driving. At first I kind of laughed, like, oh shit, don't fall asleep, dude." Then it all came back to me. I remembered we set off together and started panicking, wondering where the hell you were. I turned the car around and looked for the phone box, but I came all the way up to that lone cactus and didn't see anything. After that, I just floored it for LA. I don't know. I thought I should get help." "Wait, you were driving my car?" "Yeah, my car. The one I just arrived in?" He just nodded manically and necked his drink. "It was parked on the drive since Friday," said Bianca watery-eyed, "and I looked out just now to see you getting out of it." So it, overlapped. There was a buzz in my pocket. I stopped to check who was calling. The screen was lit up with unknown caller. Usually I'd let it go to voicemail, but since I'd apparently been lost in another damn dimension for several days. "Hello?" Silence. I waited, noting absentmindedly that Ethan was answering a call too. Then laughter erupted from the phone at my ear. A crowd of people laughing, like between jokes on a sitcom. In the laugh track gap where the characters' lines would be, I heard Ethan say, "Hey, who's this?" A pause, then, "Greetings, stranger. Are you pranking me, or did you butt dial?" My hand was shaking. I knew who was on the other end of that call. My brother cursed and looked at me in a panic. It started that night like most other nights. We were out a little too late on a country road. There were 4 of us squeezed into the little car. We were working on a school project and we were all just going to stay at Wendy's house, but her stepfather came home drunk. Needless to say, we needed to get out of there. I said we could just stay at my folks' place. They wouldn't care once I explained to them in the morning. The only problem was that I lived further away than everyone, so we got out on a crappy gravel road at 1 in the morning, which wasn't that big a deal. We were all country kids. Driving 1,000,000 miles to get anywhere was second nature to us. It's just we were deep in the forest and Jake's brights didn't work. So we were puttering along at 20 miles an hour, so we didn't broadside some buck out for a midnight stroll. In fact, it was a member of the Curvidae family's fault that, we weren't just using my truck, as it was currently sitting on my property completely useless after an early morning tussle with a deer the size of a small moose. Such is country life. We were all on deer patrol when Jake's crappy little car started making funny noises just as we were leaving the trees. A minute later, it was making even stranger noises, and promptly sputtered and died not 100 yards from the crossroad that marked the beginning of the farms. We were about 15 miles from anyone and 20-some miles from my home. We jumped out and popped the hood trying to determine the cause of the little car's untimely end. But neither Jake nor I were good with engines. Wendy took a look at it with Sam holding the light, politely telling us that girls would be taking it from here, which we obliged. I was content to stare up at the night sky, which was usually awash with every matter of astronomical body, but the clouds were rolling in, so we only had the muted light of the moon to keep us company. "Well," Wendy announced, "I can't find anything wrong with the car." "Really?" Jake asked. "Yep, just died." "That's weird. I'll have to call Danny tomorrow and see if he can tow it." "Should we start walking?" I asked. "God, it's going to take forever, isn't it?" Wendy said. "If we hurry, then we should make it before sunrise." "This is the worst night ever." "I think it got worse," Jake said. "Does anyone have service? I just tried to text my mom so she'd see it in the morning." A quick check revealed that all our phones were useless, which wasn't exactly uncommon for our area. It was weird though, since they seemed to be working a minute ago. "Is anyone else getting cold?" Sam asked. We all shook our head, but she was nearly shaking. "Let's get walking. I'll warm you up," I said. We traveled along King's Cross, taking the northern road, when something started feeling really wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like we were being watched, which was strange as we were in the middle of nowhere. "I feel weird," Jake said. "Me too." "I think there's something ahead of us," someone said. Jake pulled a flashlight out, and I immediately wished he hadn't. There was a dark figure ahead. Let's go back and take another road," I said. "Good idea," Wendy stammered. We turned back around thinking we'd take another road and just walk the extra miles or even head towards town. We quickly realized that the figure wasn't alone. The other roads all had figures on them. "What do we do?" Wendy asked. "The car," I yelled. "It doesn't run," Sam said. "No, but at least we can lock the doors. There's nowhere else to go." We scrambled back to the abandoned automobile. "Do you still have your shotgun in the trunk?" I asked Jake. "No, my mom made me take it out." The figures were getting closer, just shambling down the road. We locked the doors manually as the electronics didn't seem to work. We waited and waited and waited. As the first figure passed by, it was a man in dark clothes. He just kept walking, didn't even notice us. Several more passed. We were too scared to even breathe. They walked to the crossroads and just kind of stood there. "What are they doing?" Wendy asked. "How are we supposed to know?" Jake said. Then they started back. For at least an hour, they just wandered back and forth, never getting too far from the crossroads. "Oh God," I said. "What?" The three of them said in unison. "I know what this is." "Well, talk," Wendy nearly yelled. "They used to bury people who committed suicide at crossroads." "Why would they do that?" Jake asked. "It was a crime against God. You buried them at crossroads so they would get so confused and never find peace. They'd be stuck there forever." "So you're saying we're looking at ghosts of a bunch of guys that offed themselves?" Jake asked. Yeah, I mean, I'd put it nicer than that. Will they hurt us? I have no idea, I said. I doubt restless spirits are super kind, Sam said. Well, they've just been walking and haven't done anything yet, Wendy said. What if we just try to leave? Why don't we just stay here till morning? Jake said. Shh, I said. One of the spirits were looking at us. Sam was right. He did not look kind. Slowly the spirit turned and continued on his way. God, I can't do this all night, Wendy said and opened the door to get out. Look, one of the spirits said. She's here to take us home. There were a chorus of home, and the spirits started toward the car. Wendy dove back in and locked the door. Quickly they surrounded the vehicle. There were at least 24 of them, all staring into the car. I'd never been so scared. We thought we were safe. Then they started yelling, "Take us home! Take us home!" Next, they started to pound on the windows and doors. What are we going to do? Someone shouted. I couldn't even tell who was talking anymore. Everyone was screaming and crying. Finally, Wendy's window broke and several arms reached through and grabbed her. She screamed and they pulled her out. She was surrounded and we were too scared to move. We just sat there until sunrise and they disappeared. Suddenly the car started and we sped to my house. My parents called the police to look for Wendy. The sheriff's office called in search and rescue. But we never saw her again. No one believes us either. Everyone just thinks she wandered off into the woods. I started to think it was a dream. Until years later, I was driving up with my wife to visit my parents. It was dark on the old roads until I saw something flash in the headlights. My wife thought it was a deer. But I had just seen Wendy, and I never went down that road again. So, I was cleaning up my bedroom the other day, and I noticed a sheet of paper had gotten wedged between my mattress and the headboard of my bed. I pulled it out and it turned out that it had been written on in my own handwriting. I showed it to my parents, and they thought I was playing some sort of trick on them. So does everybody else. The handwriting is obviously mine, but I have no memory whatsoever of having written it. And if that wasn't weird enough, there's the stuff it actually says on it, which is enough to make me question my own sanity. I was told that the folks on Reddit might be interested to hear about it, so I'm going to be writing out what it said here. To whom it may concern. I spent a lot of time on Wikipedia, not for work or research, mind you, but just for pleasure. I would scroll through articles, clicking on links at random and seeing where they took me. Taking a wiki walk, I used to call it. And some of those walks could be quite long indeed. They would take me to some obscure places too. I might start out reading about, say, British tanks of the Second World War, and end up at an article about the animated films of Ralph Bakshi 2 hours later. So, interesting, but ultimately harmless. But this is a horror story, and in horror stories, harmless things are never as harmless as they seem. The upgrade I made to my computer changed all that. My laptop hadn't been able to run the latest version of Chrome, but I was tight for cash. Instead of shelling out for the newest version, I decided to buy a cheaper browser I'd seen advertised in a pop-up ad. According to the advertisement, this browser, I'm not going to say its name, I don't want anyone to go down the same rabbit hole I did, could access websites Chrome couldn't, and was completely anonymous. I liked the sound of that, so I decided to pay for it. For a while, nothing seemed to have changed, except for the aesthetic of the internet on my computer. Nothing, that is, until I tried editing Wikipedia. This time, when I clicked on the editing option, it gave me a choice. I could use traditional editor or something called master editor. I wanted to find out what master editor was and opened it up, but to my disappointment, it looked just like the traditional editor. The article I wanted to edit was one about the birds found on a specific island in the Atlantic Ocean. In its present state, the article had omitted one species of bird I thought might be native to the island. I didn't have any proof if it was found there. None of my books said it was, but the island was along its migration route, so I figured I might as well add it. I typed my change in the master editor and clicked the save button. I closed out Wikipedia for a moment and decided to go read some books. As it happened, the first book I read was one on birds. I'd read this book countless times. I'd been a bird nut since I was a kid, but I still loved reading it. When I got to the page covering the bird I had just added to the Wikipedia article, I was so surprised I dropped the book. The range map had changed. Shaking my head in surprise, I went back on the internet and pulled up the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website, which is my go-to source for bird facts. Sure enough, that island was listed as a part of the bird's range, when it hadn't been before. I pinched myself. This couldn't be real. But there was only one way to find out. This time, I went to another article, one for a movie I was a big fan of that had, to my great displeasure, flopped at the box office. I'd edited a movie's box office figures on Wikipedia before, but only to bring them in line with what official sources stated. This time, I would be doing the opposite. The movie in question had earned less than half of its budget in theaters, but my edit, the article now showed it having made over 3 times its budget. Once again, I checked other websites to see if anything had changed. The way the book and the Cornell Lab website had, I felt a combination of shock and relief that, indeed, it had. Shock that I was dealing with something I had no idea was even possible, and relief that whatever this was, it at least seemed to work in a logical, systematic way. I made an edit on Wikipedia using the master editor function, and the world around me altered itself to reflect that edit. No one had any memory of things having been the way they were before the edit. No one, that is, except me. I spent the next 2 weeks or so editing as I saw fit. As I did, I developed a code of ethics for myself while doing so. Major historical events, wars, elections, and anything resulting from them were off limits. So were most species extinctions, whether naturally occurring or man-made. I made a few exceptions for very recent man-made extinctions that I felt could easily have been avoided. It wasn't that I didn't think I could fix those things. Rather that I had a feeling whoever had put this system in place and was monitoring it would disapprove of me doing so. For a while, things went smoothly. And then the message came. There was a bright red mark on the inbox icon of my Wikipedia account. I clicked on it with some hesitation, not sure what it might contain. "This is your first warning," the message said. "Your edit to the article, Passenger Pigeon, has been reverted by a moderator. Further edits of this nature will result in further warnings and possible account termination. Do not reply to this message." I marked the message as read and continued with my editing. Just to be sure though, I looked at the Wikipedia page they claimed to have reverted. Sure enough, it looked just the same as it did before I edited it. The passenger pigeon was still extinct. After that, I stayed away from the master editor for a few days. It just didn't seem to be worth the trouble. I had already changed what I wanted to change, and for the most part gotten away with it, but something else was eating at me. Maybe it was the depression I'd been struggling with. Maybe it was the trust issues I've always had with my parents. Or maybe it was my envy towards my sister starting her own jewelry business while I was still in college. Maybe it was all of those things. But something inside me made me realize I could use the master editor to change other people. Who was to say I couldn't change myself? So that was what I did. I made an article about myself, made it as detailed as I could. Most of the details I kept as close to the real version of myself as I could, but with a couple important differences. I hadn't had any of my writings published outside of my college magazine, but the version of me in the article already had 2 novels published by Random House, and just to make things extra realistic, I made articles for those too. Now I'm sure this is the part where you're thinking, the master editor sounds pretty neat. Where can I get my hands on it? I'm telling you to stop thinking that right now because, as I said before, this is a horror story. The second message came about 5 minutes after I posted the article. I got another warning, and this one seemed a lot sterner than the first one, a lot angrier, and more direct in its wording. This is your last warning, the message said. Your newest article violates a Wikipedia master editor policy and will be deleted in 24 hours unless you can claim proof of the subject's identity. This will be followed by account termination. How did they know? Regular Wikipedia could be pretty anal about keeping its articles accurate, but this was on another level altogether. I decided to reply to the message and told them who I was. My real name, the same as the person in the article, and my desire to use the site to change myself. In hindsight, this was precisely the wrong thing to do. I received another message from the moderator. Master editors are not permitted to create articles about themselves. Your account will be locked from further activity, and account termination will commence in 24 hours. I wasn't sure what account termination was, but it didn't sound good. I tried to edit the article again, trying to make it more in line with the old life I had before this whole thing had started, but I couldn't. All I got was a symbol of a padlock and the statement that this article is locked from editing. I got the same statement in every article I tried to edit, and even when I tried to message the mods again, account termination. The phrase seemed at once ominous and vague. The best I could think of was that it would mean my account would be deactivated, but somehow it implied something more sinister than that. I had a hunch of what that something might be, but I didn't dare ask it out loud, for fear of the answer. But curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to look at my bookshelf for my copies of the 2 books I had published in this new version of reality. They were no longer there. I could feel my heart drop into my stomach. Frantically, I looked up their titles on Wikipedia, hoping my articles about them were still up. Perhaps I had simply misplaced the books. The articles were gone. Involuntarily, I screamed. It is natural to fear death, but compared to having your very existence erased, death is nothing. I am not sure if anything I create, including the story I am writing, will survive the deletion of my life. But if it does, I hope that whoever finds it, in the succeeding version of reality, is more careful and does not succumb to the temptations of being a master editor. Yours truly, name withheld. I'm still not sure who wrote that paper or why. I've actually showed it to my college's forensic science professor, and he says it's exactly what it looks like. A piece of paper I wrote on, except I can't have written on it because I don't remember writing on it. I want to say it can possibly be true, but there's really no other explanation. It's like a previous version of me, in an alternate timeline, wrote this before being deleted from existence and retroactively replaced with me. I haven't told anyone else this idea, and I'm afraid they won't take me seriously if I do. That's why I'm telling this story here. It's probably the only place that will take it seriously. One thing that's been on my mind ever since reading this is the idea of reincarnation. The idea of being reborn in another body after you die. But what if that's not entirely true? What if, instead of endlessly cycling between birth and death, we go sideways, sliding from one life to the next, overwriting the previous one, like save files in a video game. And speaking of save files, my computer is on the fritz. It hasn't been able to support the latest version of Chrome, so I may need to get a new browser. There's one I saw advertised the other day that looks pretty neat. I always hated that old spinster on the corner of Red Bud Drive. When I was growing up and didn't know any better, I used to think she was a witch or monster or something. I didn't know about crazy cat ladies and alcoholism at the time. So for some reason in my child's brain, I just assumed she was cutting up little girls and boys to feed to her army of strays. Since everyone in my class was convinced that she was the spawn of Satan, I asked my dad why no one did anything about it. He rolled his eyes as if humoring me and said, "Nowadays, we don't burn witches, we just avoid them." I'd always pedal my bike fast at that corner, ignoring the stop sign and even the honks of oncoming traffic as I steered my lavender cruiser homewards. I remember the fast clickety-clack of the playing cards every afternoon as I frantically pedaled to put a safe distance behind me. 10 years down the road was enough distance for me to acknowledge she was probably just a lonely middle-aged woman who thought drinking with cats was less sad than drinking alone. And maybe she was right. I know I would open a bottle of wine with my dog some of those lonely nights when I was back home from college. I was content to keep our uneasy truce, where I would return a half-hearted wave at her silhouette in the window when passing, if she didn't try to come any closer to me. Unfortunately, that was something I couldn't do on Halloween. Even back when I was a kid, the only other thing the old lady on Red Bud was known for aside from day drinking and pissing off the local animal control was her baked treats. 4 times a year she would participate in the local ISD bake sale, despite not having a kid. The PTA insisted. They practically begged her to provide a tart cinnamon apple pie for the silent auction. Even though she seemed to be kept alive by Jim Beam and Cat Dander, she could definitely bake a mean pastry. And so, my little brother was quite insistent that we stop at her house to round out the nights of trick-or-treating. I had driven in for the weekend, homesick and missing my parents. I might have even missed my snotty little brother, Matt, a little bit. They were so thrilled to see me after so long that they immediately took the opportunity to turn me into an unpaid babysitter so they could go to a Halloween party. Considering it fair compensation, I had had a couple glasses from Mom's open bottle of Malbec to dull the tedious misery of trick-or-treating with my little brother. It was working, the warm buzz behind my eyes softening the sharp edges of Matt's constant adolescent prattling. I would tune in for every third or fourth word, nodding encouragingly with a disinterested smile. He was dressed up as a little Iron Man, his chest beam and hand lights making electronic humming noises as they illuminated the sidewalk in front of us. It had been a pretty good haul. Matt's bag was so full of candy that he kept shifting it from one plastic laser gauntlet to another when his arms got tired. We were almost done with the last block. Everyone's door knocked on. The except for the corner house. At 3 in the afternoon, and from a safe distance I had managed to suppress my childhood fears, but just past 9 on Halloween, the old paranoia started to creep back into my stomach. I was trying to think of something I could bribe Matt with if he would let us skip the house when he made a whoosh noise and ran up the driveway towards the witch's door. I was tempted to write the little bastard off as a lost cause and head home, but he turned around halfway to make sure I was coming with him. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I walked past the station wagon she had parked there before I was even born. I turned nervously to glance towards the dusty side windows of the dead vehicle. Through the grime, a half-dozen cats watched me from the safety of the other side of the glass. I would hear their chorus of rumbling growls, warning me not to try anything funny or get close. There were more peeking from beneath the house, their eyes glowing from the headlights of a passing car. They paced behind the overgrown skirt of the house, dozens of them having made the foundation of her house their nest. I tried to ignore the army of strays as Matt took the stairs up the witch's porch 2 at a time. He hopped onto the welcome mat with both feet, straining for a moment to reach the doorbell. As soon as it buzzed, he struck up a pose, ready to blast the lady if she didn't comply. The door creaked open ominously just as I caught up with Matthew. It was dark inside, aside from the dull orange glow of the fireplace and flickering blue and white of an old television. Lit from behind, the witch's silhouette was a lanky and twisted thing. Her spine was tilted at severe and horrible angles, as if her back had given out under the sheer weight of all of her evil. Only the fringes of her wild black hair caught the light, giving her a terrifying halo like an insect's nest, as she reached out a bony and gnarled hand out past the doorframe. She grasped hungrily towards us, her vile claw sweeping a few inches over Matt's head to take hold of a slender chain. The witch's knuckles popped audibly as she gripped the pull chain tightly and yanked it down. It made a sound like a chicken's neck snapping, and the hanging porch light groaned with a dull hum as the fluorescent bulb warmed up. Matt was frozen in place, just as terrified as I was as the witch let out a laugh that was a moist gurgle. It rose to a hiss deep in the back of her throat, her whole twisted frame shuddering menacingly, and the light finally came to life. "Oh, hello. Aren't you precious?" She gushed over Matt, coughing into her hand to clear her throat. Her voice was less Wicked Witch and more Minnesota Mother, as she threw out a friendly, "I thought all the trick-or-treaters went home for the night. Don't you know?" She blended the last 3 words into a single "don't you know" before straightening up. In the bright fluorescent, I could make out the multiple kittens and the glitter on her faded pink sweatshirt. She smiled a big white-toothed smile at Matt expectantly, and it took him a moment to remember his line. His little brain was obviously having trouble processing the sudden change in mood, as he asked more than threatened her with a timid, "Trick or treat?" The vile tangle on top of her head that I had mistaken for snakes and crawling insects turned out to be simple bedhead from where she had apparently crashed hard on the couch. Her black frizzy hair was matted wildly off to one side, on the kind of cowlick you could only get from sleeping off a few too many drinks. The witch lifted her eyes towards me, while my own eyes were watering from the stink of whiskey and far too much perfume. "He's adorable. She seemed to lose her train of thought as she stared at me curiously, her smile broadening ever so slightly as if she recognized me. "I have a special treat for the both of you. Just be a moment." She vanished back inside her house for a few seconds, Hardly time for the stench of her perfume to dissipate before she returned with an aluminum baking sheet and a thin spatula. With a deft swoop of her hand and a sharp pop, she pried a cookie free. She set down the spatula and held out the prize to Matt. It was a gingerbread cat. The scent of caramel and fresh vanilla cutting through the fog of her boozy stench as Matt took it from her. The treat was so fresh and soft. I could see a dimple from the pressure of Matt's tiny plastic fingertips. Its fur was lovingly scored into the cookie. Chocolate and caramel traced meticulously into the line work. I had to admit that if she ever got tired of being a drunken cat lady, she could probably get on a job as a high-end baker. As Matt breathed an almost silent, "Thank you," the witch turned her attention to me. "Oh, and something for Big Sis." She set down the now empty cookie pan, the surface marred by the burnt outlines where 5 kitty cookies had been baked. From the side table, she produced a small brown craft-colored rectangular box. Something rattled inside softly as she handed it to me, but I noticed tied to the hand-curled orange and black ribbons on the front were a trio of small bottles of pumpkin-spiced vodka. The witch didn't let go of the box, offering me a playful wink. "You're 21, right?" I smirked and lied with a wordless nod. She let go of the box and offered me a knowing smile before she warned me. "Well, a good babysitter needs something to take the edge off. Just have a couple, though. Don't open the big surprise. Unless little Iron Man here starts to get out of hand. Then you should open it and thank me for the help." "I'll thank you now. Thanks," I replied, feeling a little silly after all of these years of self-induced trauma. "You have a happy Halloween, miss." I let it hang, because after all of these years, I'd never actually bothered to learn her name. She smiled a big bright smile one more time, brushing cookie crumbs off of her kitten sweatshirt as she giggled. "I always have a happy Halloween. After all, I'm the Witch of Redbud." I spent the rest of the walk home feeling utterly stupid. I knew the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny weren't real a decade ago, but some small childish part of me had still believed that a sad, lonely old woman was going to eat me if I got too close to her. At least Matt wouldn't have to grow up in this town believing stupid crap like that now that he'd actually met the witch. He was merrily scarfing down the gingerbread cat as we walked, the gummy caramel causing him to smack and chew loudly with each bite until it softened. By the time we got home, he had a little Tony Stark mustache and goatee made of dark chocolate, and I told him to go wash it off. I prepped a cup of decaf, waiting for the Keurig to spit and hiss at the end before emptying 2 mini bottles of pumpkin vodka into the cup. My buzz was wearing off, and I knew Matt was going to be up for at least another hour from the sugar high alone. He returned from the bathroom with his helmet and gloves taken off, knowing full well he would need the full range of motion in his fingers if he was going to sort through the candy efficiently. Efficient candy sorting went like this. We dumped the bags over, separating the hard candy bullshit from the good stuff like Ziplocs of cookies and fudge, fun-sized chocolates, and big spender full-size bars. For safety concern purposes, we would eat every 5th or 6th piece to make sure there was no THC or razor blades hidden in the Snickers bars. After 2 peanut butter cups, half a Toblerone, a bag of chocolate cookies, a mini toffee bar, and the 3rd mini bottle of pumpkin vodka, I was done with the inspection. Matt wasn't content and gorged on what had to have been half his body weight in sugar. I sent him to bed just before 11. He was wise beyond his years. It made me pinky swear not to eat any more of his candy while he slept, knowing a pinky swear wouldn't hold up for shit in court. I helped myself to the other half of the Toblerone before passing out on the couch. I was awakened by a clammy child's hand pushing on my face. I sat upright suddenly, arms flailing like I'd just woken up from a power blackout at a frat house party. As my bleary eyes focused, I could see Matt was standing by the coffee table, clutching his stomach and sniffling at me. My stomach hurts. No shit, I replied, before remembering that I was dealing with a child. He was still new to the idea that overindulging led to consequences. It was better he learned on chocolate instead of booze, like his sister. You ate a lot of candy. Have you taken a Pepto? Matt shook his head slowly, opening his mouth to speak. Instead of words, a torrent of blood and congealed chocolate spilled past his lips and onto my face. I screamed, leaping off the couch and trying to wipe the gore out of my eyes. I felt my own gorge rise as I tasted the blood and peanut butter, instantly awake and sober. Matt continued to empty the contents of his guts onto the white sofa, and even though I was worried for Matt, my first thought was that my parents were definitely going to blame the couch on me. I carried him to the kitchen as the vomiting subsided. Unfortunately, without that awfulness to occupy his throat, now Matt was screaming shrilly and flailing on the tile in the grip of a seizure. I called 911. Rattling off our address while Matt tore his shirt off with a mewling shriek. The dispatcher was telling me it would be around 10 minutes, as I watched my brother's stomach twist and deform. Something was inside him, desperately trying to get out. Matt's stomach was distended as if he were pregnant, the thrashing limbs of something inhuman within causing the skin to redden and bulge. He twisted and kicked, desperate for the pain to end. Knocking the sole of his tiny foot against the kitchen table, the box the witch had given me fell over the edge and landed with a thunk and a rattle. On the bottom of the box, written with a playful filigree, were the words, "You should open me now." In that moment, I remember the almost playful way she'd said that if Matt started to get out of hand, I should open it. Desperate beyond any rational thought, I leapt onto the box, tearing it open. I felt my heart sink at the sight of what she had packed for me. Inside, nestled on top of purple and black tissue paper, was a bright orange-handled box cutter. In the same cheerful and elegant handwriting were 2 words, "You're welcome." I kicked the box away, shaking my head as Matt squealed and coughed up a dark bubble of blood. He was growing pale, a blue tinge settling into his quivering lower lip. His stomach settled as his chest rose. Matt had stopped breathing, his eyes pleading as whatever thing was inside him decided to try and escape through his esophagus. He was choking on whatever it was as it tried to burrow out of his throat. Tears streaked down his face, cutting paths through the blood on his cheeks. I reached for the box cutter, the razor blade extending with a soft click as I crawled over to him on all fours. I ran my fingers across his still distended stomach, and the thing shifted at the touch. It retreated back into the stomach, and Matt took in a deep and grateful breath, before squealing again. A limb of some kind pushed back against my fingers, as if to reassure me that I was in the right place. I didn't want to watch, but I wasn't going to cut Matt open with my eyes closed. He struggled, his little frame surprisingly strong as I put a knee on top of his chest to hold him down with my weight. The blade was blessedly sharp, and the tissue almost leapt apart as I cut in. Blood gushed from the wound, but I paid it no mind as I widened the hole. I had a sense of deja vu as I finished the 2-foot-long cut, and I held open the gash. The thing inside sounded like the witch's cat, warning me away with a keening growl. I came out head first. A chocolate and tan calico cat. Its fur caked in blood and streaks of actual chocolate. The thing had an appalling likeness to the gingerbread cookie version, even sporting a single mismatched dot of white fur, where stray frosting had landed on the original. It leapt past me and ran out of the kitchen, leaving a trail of bloody paw prints on the white tile floor. I was too busy trying to stifle the blood with Matt's t-shirt to chase the thing. The paramedics were a couple minutes early, thankfully, but too late by far to have saved Matt if I hadn't opened him up. The police officer was kind enough to tell me during the questioning that Matt was going to be fine, and he reassured me that I would get to see my parents again once he had finished taking my statement. I was too broken at that point to even consider lying. I told him everything. I confessed to everything, even stealing Mom's wine. It was only as I finished that it dawned on me that no one would believe me. I was going to be arrested or worse, committed to some loony bin where my parents would never visit and I'd never be let out. What's going to happen to me? We're done. I got your statement. Your parents are waiting, but I'm going to have a word with them first. What's going to happen to me? I repeated, the strain causing my voice to break as he closed his notebook. You're going home, he replied. I was too wrapped up in my own trauma to notice that the detective was clearly going through some shit of his own. His eyes were bloodshot and dark as if he hadn't slept all week. He sighed and rested a hand on mine. I have to go talk to the other kids. Just wait here until I finish and I'll talk to your parents. Other kids? It was when he said other kids that everything fell into place and I understood. I remember that the witch's baking sheets had the outline of 5 cookies baked into it. And I remember all of those cats on her property glaring at people and warning them away. All of those cats. I knew even that if I ever went by and watched long enough, I'd spot that chocolate and tan calico with the white spot. I never tested that theory, and the cops never arrested her. They hadn't bothered to even question her in 20 years of Halloweens. What would they put on the report? That she was growing cats out of gingerbread in children's bellies? It was insane. No one outside of town would ever believe it. 2/3 of the townies themselves wouldn't believe it. Like my dad said all of those years ago, nowadays we don't burn witches, we just avoid them. So all I can do is warn you. Stay away from the old witch at the corner of Redbud. And if you can't do that, at least check for razors in the candy. I was sitting in the dumpy saloon of Halverston. You could call it a watering hole, but I reckon few animals with any sense would want to drink here. That goes double for most people who dislike dingy and dirty. The tables are made of splintery wood covered with cuts and scrapes. Heard a rumor that the Undertaker was a lousy carpenter, and he used the same skills, or the lack of, to make tables and coffins. Hint to the wise. Don't die in a town and get the local package deal. Don't ask me about the rest of the furniture in our rusty bucket of bad drinks. I know. You don't care about what the place looks like. You want to know about the beer. Well, it was a few trots away from being horse piss. I remember going down to New Orleans and drinking. I almost spat the stuff out. Too much flavor. My wallet wished I did. Now I sat with my friends, with a half-empty mug. Usually, I would have more, but after my time in Chicory County, beer, well, drinking, wasn't quite that interesting anymore. Could save some money that way. Oh yeah, friends. There was Horace. Folks called him Horse. Of course he hated that. Beard dripped from his mustache. Horace worked at the general store. Who else? Oh yeah, Muke from the blacksmiths. He still had his apron on. I think he even wore it to bed. And the last was Ned, the deputy. We were sitting and talking. Ned was telling us about the events in Chicory. There was a hanging, but it was mighty strange. Getting your neck stretched is pretty weird, Muke said as he peered at Ned. A chill raced down my back like someone had poured some cold beer down it. I looked at my pink and shaking hands. Yeah, I knew a lot about what happened. Too much. Ned nodded. I don't remember much because it just seemed like someone was telling tall tales. There was some guff about a condemned man screaming like all of the devils from hell were after him. He kept hollering to be hung. I don't believe in such things. If I can't feel or see or sniff it, it doesn't exist. Or scoffed. Muke just gazed at Ned. I knew better. I'd been in Chicory County and knew too much of the goings on there. Too much. Again, I looked at my hands. Nothing had changed from the last time. Well, except they shook a bit more. Used to think like Ned, but well, what happened in Chicory changed my mind. I was there before the man was hung. It was a mighty strange day for me. I was the center of their attention. Well, you know that you make the best boots around here, Horse said while running his hand through his beery beard. Everyone nodded. I had sold them shoes, or someone they knew shoes. Well, I went down to Chicory to deliver some boots to the sheriff there. McAllister was his name. Chicory is barely a town. It's even smaller than Helverston. They don't even have a whore. We got one, just a homely looking one. I've seen prettier mares. At least their eyes don't look so world-weary. Anyway, back to Chicory. The town used to be something special because of the silver mine, but after the collapse, the mining stopped and the town dried up. I bet some folks wished it blew away. Now it's just a run-down group of shabby buildings. Most of them are empty. I was in jail. No, not in a cell, Horace. Don't start laughing. I had some boots to deliver. I usually don't do it by hand, but I was hoping to get more orders. Oh yeah, Muke. Chicory had a jail because there were a lot more people during its heyday. So there I was with Sheriff McAllister watching him fondle the soft leather of his new boots. Made sure I got my money first, though. I was too busy watching McAllister grin and move his hands like he was touching a woman. Almost felt like I had stumbled into someone's intimate time. Sheriff? Should I give you two some time alone? He scoffed and grinned widely, showing off his brown tobacco-stained teeth. It has been a while since I've touched a woman or good boots, but I can wait. Someone snickered in one of the cells. Damn, I should have been more aware. In one of the cells was a short, skinny man with eyes that blazed and burned like he just came up from perdition. So full of heck. It just shone from his eyes like fire from an overstoked furnace. I looked at the jail door to make sure it was locked. Didn't want that miscreant to get out and mess with me. What's the story on your guest? McAllister sighed. A moment passed. He pointed at the inmates with a calloused thumb. He murdered a poor banjo player for some reason. In a few days, the judge will come by, hear his story, and we'll have a hanging. Wish it was someplace else, though. This town has seen enough sadness and misery. I nodded. The town sure felt like it had too much of something. None of it was good. Looked around the small jail. It just had 4 cells. 2 were used to store various boxes and barrels. 1 cell had someone sleeping in it. If he didn't wake up when I came in, well, no big deal. The last cell had the prisoner. His eyes were downcast, and his whole body slumped like whatever had held him up left. McAllister eyed his prisoner over his beat-up wooden desk. On his left side was a wooden shelf with a banjo on it. That caught my eye. The neck was black with ruby red strings. It was beautiful and strange. For some reason, it seemed like the area around it was darker, like the instrument was sucking up the light. For a moment, my fingers twitched. I shook my head and looked back at McAllister. I guess the poor victim used that. McAllister nodded. I don't have too much to tell the judge. At least anything that made sense. All I have are witnesses to the attack and murder. It was in the saloon, but everyone seemed stone cold drunk. Or stoned sober. Didn't matter none. No one could tell me anything useful. Just the prisoner red-handed and a dead man on the floor. It seemed like an easy case, but I'll let the judge suss out the truth. Kinda missed some of what McAllister was saying. A tune danced in my head. I didn't know where it came from. I'm not the musical type. My fingers felt warm and empty like they wanted something. Where's all of the air? I began to gasp like a beached fish. My fingers ached like they lost their one true love and would never see it again. What was going on? I had to get up and walk around toward the banjo. When I grabbed it, a feeling of completion filled me. How is this possible? I'm no musician. I can barely carry a tune even if I had a bucket. But I felt good. Too good. My fingers had found their one true love again, and they set to playing. What was the name of the tune? The name was at the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring it to mind. McAllister gaped at me like a donkey looking at a Bible, as the first notes flew from the banjo. I guess my face didn't look so different, but who knows? The music was in my head and fingers. Sweet and seductive like a fresh peach, or that first summer day when you have nothing to do and plenty of ideas. Wait, where did that come from? More notes dripped from the banjo like good cheap beer. McAllister grinned. His eyes were closed like he was thinking about fondling a woman or boots, or maybe both of them at the same time. Hey, I'm not a saint. I know that bad boots and women would make anyone miserable. My fingers flew across the strings as I sauntered my way to the prisoner's cell. Why? What's going on? How come I can't put the banjo down? I just knew that I was in the grip of something awful. Wait, it's not quite right. I wasn't the target. Thank goodness. Again, why can't I put the damn thing down? I saw parties and banquets filled with well-dressed people. The fine-looking ebony tables with gold highlights were almost groaning under the weight of the many dishes placed on them. My fingers played on as the guests moved aside for another person. It was the prisoner. How? Why? I was not in the seedy jail now. I was in this place. I don't know where or what this place was. All I could see was the table, guests, and the prisoner. My fingers kept playing. The prisoner looked around with wide eyes. He gazed back at the table with longing. Heck, I wanted some of the food too, but somehow I knew it wasn't for me. Why? One moment the guests were there, and the next, they were gone. I didn't see them leave. What's going on here? The prisoner pulled up an ebony chair with gold highlights and sat down. Then he grabbed at the dishes and stuffed his face like he hadn't eaten in days. I knew McAllister was a good man, and wouldn't starve his prisoners no matter how terrible they were. Why was the prisoner acting like this? All I saw was pieces of flying food, and all I heard were the grunts and slurps. It was more like what you would hear from pigs eating at a trough. Maybe not. I think the pigs would be more civil. I'm not the most elegant of men, but I do remember what my mother taught me about table manners. My friends still tease me when I say grace before eating. After a while, the prisoner sat back and belched. It almost sounded like thunder in the distance. The table looked like a battle had taken place. Flesh and bones littered the table along with several types of sauces like the blood and juices of the fallen. Thank goodness, I've never been in a war, but I've talked to a few grizzled veterans about the experience. I wanted to comment, but my mouth stayed shut. Only my fingers moved. The tune changed. It became more dark and seductive. Don't ask me. I don't know how I knew. Just like that, women. I couldn't see their faces or even any details. All I could see was seductive curves and inviting eyes and lips. Again, I got this feeling that got the attention of these barely seen women was not a good thing. Whispers and giggles filled the air. The prisoner looked around, and his eyes widened like a kid with a wallet full of money in a candy store. Then he smiled like he had quite a sweet tooth. Again, all I could see was this flowing smoke where I would get quick glimpses of curves of body parts usually kept covered in public. I wanted some too, even though I knew it wasn't for me. Why? My fingers kept playing as the smoke covered the prisoner, and he began to gasp and jerk. I could see he was having a good time when the gasping turned into short yelps. Okay, something is not right. Get off of me, you disgusting dead things. You stink like a green pawn in the summer. The prisoner screamed. He tried to raise his arms, but the smoke pulled them down. While this was happening, my fingers started to ache, and I was getting tired. I reckoned that I could only do this for a bit longer. Somehow, I kept on playing. The tune went darker, and instead of being seductive, it sounded mean. I don't know how I knew. The smoke faded away, and the scene changed. We were standing on dark red dirt like Georgia clay. Somehow I knew it wasn't. I wanted to stop playing and not witness what was going to happen next, but my stubborn fingers kept playing. There was a low rumbling that made my feet twitch and itch, and then weapons began to grow out of the ground. What? Knives and other weapons continued to come out of the dirt like they were plants. I really wished I could wake up or at least stop playing this tune, but I had no control. When weapons show up, well, I bet nothing good is going to happen. The prisoner looked around. His eyes darted like he was looking for a way out. Hey, I'm sorry. You can bring back the women, he yelled. Nothing answered. I heard whispers. Luckily, I couldn't understand what they were saying. I just knew that I would be better off not knowing. Then a skinny grayish-green creature appeared. I would have stopped playing to try to run away, but it seemed like my feet were nailed to the crumbly red dirt while my fingers played on. The poor creature stumbled up to the prisoner while holding out its bony arms. I wondered what this thing was. It was so thin. I could practically feel the ribs that jutted from its sides. The creature stepped closer and moaned so hideously. Darkness sunk into its empty eye sockets. The prisoner gawked at the creature and took a step back. Get away from me. It seemed like the creature paid no heed and kept dragging its skeletal feet forward. Oh no, You're not going to get me. I'll kill you. The prisoner looked to his left and pulled his sword out of the dirt. I was expecting to see rust on the blade, but it was clean and smooth like it was newly forged. Again, the creature shuffled forward as it moaned. The prisoner cursed and swung the blade. The creature fell apart like it was just a collection of body parts. No blood either. No, this isn't right, I thought. This creature seemed to be in pain and misery and was no threat. Then again, I was just someone playing a banjo. How would I act if one of these creatures approached me? No, I don't know. Maybe I would run away or help. I knew for sure I wouldn't strike out unless I was attacked. A moment later, there were more whispers and moaning. 3 more skinny creatures appeared and made their way toward the prisoner. They also held out their hands as though they needed help like the first one. But the prisoner just clenched his jaw and waited for the creatures to get within range of his sword. Just like the first time he cut them down without mercy. A smile covered his face. I've seen smiles like that. Seen it on faces of people who had an advantage and were willing to get as much as they can. Even if it was beyond reason or morals. It was also on the faces of the men who robbed me, and even took and smashed my tools years ago when I went on a business trip. It took me forever to replace them. I was looking at the true nature of the prisoner. Gotta say, it wasn't a pretty sight. 6 more creatures appeared and the prisoner laughed. Hey, this is fun. Again, they were slain. 12 more creatures appeared. He just clenched his jaw and waited. I was getting tired of seeing the slaughter. The creatures did nothing to defend themselves. They just held out their hands, moaning for help. This time, I tried to turn my head, but nothing happened. I had to witness the murder again. Why can't I move my head? Why am I here? What am I? A witness? Again, the prisoner cut down the creatures, and again the whispers happened. 24 creatures appeared. Don't ask me how I knew how many. I don't know. The prisoner narrowed his eyes. Come on. As the creature came closer, I noticed that the prisoner was losing his nerve to fight. Maybe he was getting too tired. The prisoner's eyes darted around looking for a path free of the moaning things. Then he found one. He tossed the sword to the ground and ran. One of the creatures got knocked over. It just tiredly crawled to its feet and followed the prisoner. For some reason, I followed across the sword and knife-littered ground. My breath came in gasps as the prisoner tried to dodge his pursuers like he owed them money. No, not money. Something else. Also, I wondered where these creatures were coming from. I never saw them appear. They would just be there. The prisoner found himself in the middle of a bunch of moaning, plaintive creatures. Again, he struck out at the closest ones with another sword, but his swings were more like flailing than precise attacks. I could see that he was getting tired. Fear kept him slashing away, but I felt he was at the end of his rope. What would happen to him when he couldn't keep the creatures away? I looked as my fingers continued to play on. More moaning creatures appeared and the poor prisoner was buried beneath them. Yeah, I was feeling sorry for him and them. Maybe I shouldn't, but the situation seemed very strange and maybe no one should have to go through this. Sorry. Shouldn't have killed that banjo player. But I hated that song. It reminded me of the time I found my wife with that shoemaker. She loved that song. So angry. Turned her head into red mush and hid the body where no one would find her. Why would she do this to me? Leave me alone. His scream cut through the moaning. Oh, damn. When I was younger and looked more presentable, I used to chase almost anything that was a woman. Yeah, I had been invited by a semi-attractive woman to spend the night. It didn't come to anything other than me being surprised by the husband's sudden appearance. The only thing I lost was a coat and maybe some skin from my palms when I scraped them on the dirt outside the window. I never went back to that country again and avoided any married women like the plague. No cure for being shot. I guess that saying that the truth always comes out is true. At the time I just laughed off the experience, but now, well, there were consequences. The prisoner stopped screaming and I wondered what happened to him. My fingers felt like they were being broken one by one. Considering what happened, I guess I deserved that, but the pain was pretty bad. Somehow I still kept playing then when a shout, I smashed the cursed banjo against the dirt. "Y'all alright?" McAllister asked. All I could muster was a mumbled, "Huh?" My hands were aching a bit, but that was fading. McAllister peered at me like something was wrong. "You've been standing there staring into space like you're thinking of making more boots or shoes or something." "What's going on?" I looked around the room. There was no black banjo. Did I just dream that? "Yeah, sorry. Gotta get something to eat." It wasn't a good excuse. The prisoner wept in his cell. I had to look at him, so I walked over to his cell. He was curled up in the corner while sobs shook his body. For a moment, he looked up and saw me. His reaction to my face made me step back. "Get that horrible thing away from me. Get." He tried to push himself into the wall. "I think that's enough," McAllister barked. I should have just walked up to McAllister and left afterwards, but I glanced into the next cell. No, I just had to look. Did I really see someone sleeping in a cell? Somehow, I knew that was wrong. The first thing I saw was the blood-stained blanket on the floor. Again, should have stopped there. My eyes betrayed me, or maybe I hadn't finished getting my punishment. Or lesson. A corpse lay on the bed. There was a big dent in its temple, and a black banjo with red strings lay cradled in its arms like a cherished lover. But the part that I won't forget was the smile on the corpse's face. It felt like victory, or that revenge had been carried out. What was that saying? If you are going out for revenge, dig 2 graves. What if you're dead? I heard McAllister walk up behind me. "Dang, that damn blanket keeps falling. Why is there a smile on that body's face? Don't recollect seeing one earlier. Maybe I missed it. You should be moving on." I nodded. A plaintive wail came from the prisoner. "Don't want to see them anymore. Stretch my neck, bash my head, or shoot me dead." Followed me as I left the jail. The table was quiet for a few moments. Ned took another swig of his beer. I guess there was some law in that town anyway. Thanks, Lou, for the tale. The others nodded and thanked me. It was a weeknight, and everybody had to get up early for work. Muke and Horse patted my shoulder before settling the tab. For too many moments, I held my head in my hands. One of the reasons I stick to the straight and narrow was that I spent too much time on the primrose path. Nothing serious. No one died or even got badly hurt, but I thought of the prisoner's wife. How many stupid things did I do in my youth that I would pay for? Too many. I got up from my table with a sigh. It was always an ambitious project. If we got this piece of it done within time and budget, both of which were quite generous, Our team would be contracted to oversee a worldwide effort. It was unheard of. My partner Tony and I had spent 6 weeks already making regular dives in our little pod. The thing was engineered like a beast to withstand all kinds of pressure. The application to other fields could be enormous. I had no idea what kind of person has the resources to build such a thing, but between me and Tony, we had discussed the short list many times. One of those big names had to have a real fetish for underwater cartography. Tony was a natural explorer, with a long background in surveying and every field that crossed paths with it. He was the kind of kid that grew up drawing maps of the woods behind his house. If I had been a kid in his neighborhood, I probably would have been right there with him. Fortunately for both of us, I grew up 1,000 miles away on the coast. The ocean was my nerd pool. Plants, wildlife, terrain, water composition, every bit of it fascinated me. Sadly, in today's world, one has to choose a single focus to make any sort of career. I was enough of a weirdo that I wanted to be the world's foremost expert on seabeds. I still don't know why. Guess I always had to be painfully different. We're running so much equipment down here, it's ridiculous. We have given carte blanche and went absolutely nuts with it. Feels like half our indoor space is just a stack of hard drives recording data from all our sensors. We've got constant temperature readings, continuous water sample tests, video from literally every angle on the outside of the pod, radar, sonar, currents. Put this bubble on land and a conspiracy theorist would shit himself at the amount of data. The one I hate is the ambient light sensor. Every few minutes, our exterior lighting blacks out without warning and leaves us completely in the dark long enough to take a reading. The equipment is incredibly sensitive, finding traces of light that we can't even see. And for the time it takes to get that measurement, Tony and I are silent, alone, and terrified. Something about that darkness stirs a primal fear deep in my gut. It was after one of those dark flashes that something caught our eye, a blip on a monitor. It was flowing with the water, but otherwise stayed in one place. Even the sleeping sharks tended to drift. We turned the window side of the pod in that direction and went for a closer look. Chills went down my spine when I recognized the shape. A human body tied, no, chained, to a large pile of cinder blocks. The chains wrapped tightly around his arms and legs and wove in and out of the blocks half buried in the sand. I'm no judge of ocean corpses, but this one looked awfully fresh. Who would sail this far out? I began. Right then we were plunged into darkness. I gripped my armrests tightly, feeling sweat bead on my upper lip. I wanted to look away, terrified of what might be leering through the window at us when the lights came back on. Nothing changed, of course. The body was still dead and swaying in the current 30 feet away. Tony let out a breath, and I realized he was just as shaken as I was. We shared a chuckle. I reckon we're gonna have to let somebody know about this, he commented. What would they even do? Don't know. But the video proves we had nothing to do with it, so there's no reason not to. Should we give them coordinates, or... Tony shrugged. He was just opening his mouth when he peered through the window with confusion on his face. The body's eyes were open now. It seemed to be a trick of the current, but for a second, I would swear they were moving. Then they locked onto us with an undeniable focus. The young man in chains started writhing, trying to kick and pull and do anything to free himself. He's alive. Tony swore loudly and grabbed the controls. I sank back in my chair, even more terrified than I already was. Wait. I murmured half under my breath. Tony was already extending a gripper and a cutting arm. Both tools we had been provided for sample collection without request. The man outside was sputtering now, choking on water. He looked to be screaming something at us. By the time Tony cut through the first chain, he had gone still again. Guess we ought to try and take his body back anyway, he mused. Tank should just fit him. I didn't respond. I was still trying to figure out how the man had survived under this much pressure in the first place. Even if he had been dumped seconds before we found him, it didn't make sense. I waited quietly while Tony continued cutting through layer after layer of chains. I don't know how long it took, but eventually the body was freed, and we were able to maneuver it into a collection drawer underneath our feet. We decided to call it a day and haul this poor bastard up to the surface, where our ship was waiting. There wasn't much to say. We watched silently as the layers passed and the light from above came back into view. Schools of fish swarmed above and around our pod without comment from our end. A few curious things nosed up to the windows. We focused on getting back. 2/3 of the way up, there was a small thump on the bottom of the pod. We were fairly well insulated, but every now and then something big bumped into us hard enough to make a noise. We didn't bother with the monitors. It happened again. This time, I started cycling through monitor views, trying to find what was so enamored with our little bubble. While I was still staring at the screen before me, a rapid beating filled the cabin. Tony had turned white. Someone was knocking, and it wasn't coming from outside. I drew up my feet and cowered in my chair. I could deal with sharks and giant squid, but I'd like to think I'd be okay if I ever discovered a leviathan or some shit, but this was too much. Tony found a sub-command to drain the water from the sample tank, and within moments the beating had stopped and was replaced with faint coughing. He was dead, I whispered. We watched him die. He ain't now. Tony shrugged and scratched the back of his neck. He wouldn't look me in the eye. That's not possible. Must be. You saw it and so did I. Tony. Look, I don't know any more about this than you do. All I know is there's a guy down there, and we're about to rescue him. Anything else we'll figure out. Tony broke protocol and opened the pod before our docking station was fully drained. He had already started the mechanics to open the drawer, and we were both standing there when a young man in a tattered suit flopped out. You all right? Tony spoke up. The man looked at him, taking a long moment to figure out how to focus on his face. Then he did the same with me. What year is it? He finally choked. His voice was hoarse from the salt water he was still coughing up. 2019. The stranger let out a stream of curses while picking himself up off the floor. Who sent you? He demanded. We don't know. Who paid for this? Some corporation. We don't know who's in charge, Tony explained calmly. Can I get you anything? I cut in impulsively. Food, dry clothes, a doctor? No doctors. The man snapped. He paced in a circle. Tony and I were at a loss. You get paid for this, right? Of course. So what name is on the checks? I thought back to the direct deposit information. Discordia Inc. He stopped pacing and looked me in the eye. That's the first good news I've heard in 87 years. I'm reaching out here because I know it's my only option left. I think it may be the only way for me to contact someone outside. I'm begging for this to go through. The only friends I have on Facebook or Instagram live in the same town as me, so reaching out to them for help would be beating a long dead horse. They've seen it. They're just as useless as I am. My town is small, slow. I'm not sure what we did to bring upon a divine reckoning. If anything, the people around here are much more devout than most these days. They're kind, giving, and understanding to a fault. Those with faith are truly struggling. I'm an atheist, a bit of the black sheep within my family. I was an atheist, at least. I don't know what I believe in anymore. I can barely fathom some of the things I've seen and heard these past few days. Anyways, the God-fearing folk have taken it the hardest. A lot of them are dead, by their own doing. I tried to stop Mr. Warren before he set his house ablaze. I swear I did. I could hear his girls weeping from somewhere inside. His wife was singing. She always had such a wonderful voice. It was difficult to hear over the trumpets. He told me that angels had crawled into his body and kept whispering to him. We failed, he told me. We failed, and this was our punishment. He was dripping with gasoline. I stood outside of his home as he walked back in and closed the door. I stood there as his house was engulfed by hellfire. I'm rambling. I need to start from the beginning. The trumpets began with the sunrise. I have chronic insomnia and like to have my morning coffee on the front porch, watching the sky become pale. When I first heard them, I thought it was someone screaming. No, it was many voices screaming. Hundreds. Thousands. It sounded like it was coming from behind me, above me, and from miles away all at once. The longer I listened, the more it sounded like the entire earth was groaning. There was a ringing quality to it as well, creating some kind of horrendous harmony. It was agonizing. I could see my neighbors flooding out of their homes, bundled and sleeping, looking around in confusion. My next-door neighbor, a quiet, kind old widow, knelt in the grass and began to pray. When I approached her, she shooed me away with an animosity in her eyes I had never seen before. The local pastor called a meeting to the church. I knew this because my mother called to invite me. The trumpets continued to blare. I told her that a migraine was coming on and that I loved her but would much rather stay home. I checked the news. Nothing. I refreshed all of my social media pages, but there hadn't been anything new since around 5:30 that morning. The trumpets continued until around noon. I absentmindedly tried to refresh my phone while I sat by the window. There was not a single person outside. I assumed they were still in church. I was beginning to feel a bit jittery. That morning had felt like some kind of fever dream, but the scope of it was beginning to trickle into my brain. When my mother called me again, she sounded exhausted. She's a wonderful woman, always the one to bake extra for school bake sales and donating old clothes to the shelter. She works at the retirement home and stays hours past her shift to talk to her favorite patients. I had never heard her sound so defeated. Revelations, she said to me. Our judgment has been sealed. It was like someone was speaking through her mouth. My mother doesn't talk like that. This was the moment the dread began to pool in my belly. I felt nausea begin to churn as cool panic trickled down my back. Sweetheart, the sky. Out of my window, I could see the sun dipping beneath the hills. It looked wrong, like some kind of simulation. There was no sunset, no pink clouds swirled upon an orange horizon. The sky was a crisp blue, even as the last flicker of yellow disappeared. Then it was black. Like a light switching off, it was a darkness so intense it felt physical. I feared if I stepped outside I would suffocate in it. It was unearthly, unholy. The lights in my house went off with it, all except for the 2 scented candles I had left in my kitchen. I curled around them for what felt like an eternity. My phone had also shut off, but thankfully it turned back on when prompted. I tried to call my mother back, but it went straight to voicemail. The trumpets began again the next day. They woke me up from where I had come to rest on the kitchen floor, huddled around my candles. I have slept more in these past few days than I have in weeks. I can't make sense of it. It's now day 3. I haven't gone further than down the street when I saw Mr. Warren, as I've become terrified of the people that I've known for decades. I haven't spoken to my mother since the day it all began. They blame me. I know it. Sometimes, in the dead of that pitch black night, I swear I see several pairs of eyes outside of my window. They reflect some of the candlelight. Sometimes I hear gunshots. A few times I've heard what sounds like dogs fighting over something. I can't help but picture my good neighbor's corpses being torn up by their own hungry pups. They're all dying. A final apology to God. I don't know why they haven't come for me. Please, if there is anything holy left to forgive, let someone see this. I can hear the trumpets beginning once again.